Now, the federal government of Nigeria is facing scrutiny over perceived policy inconsistencies and the duplication of a contract related to the International Cargo Tracking Node scheme. The Federal Executive Council had on July 13, 2024, approved a new contract for advanced technology solutions in Nigeria's oil and gas sector, effectively reissuing a contract that had already been awarded. The Minister of State for Petroleum, Heineken Lukpobiri, said the new contract would facilitate the tracking of every cargo of crude oil from Nigeria to its destination. However, documents obtained by this day newspaper show that a similar contract for the cargo tracking system was previously awarded in March 2023 to a consortium of 5 companies. We now turn to RISE analyst Dr. Sam Amadi to make us better understand the confusion that the government has allegedly thrown Nigerians into. Thank you for joining us on Newsday, Dr. Amadi.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Now, government is supposed to be a continuum, but that doesn't seem to be the case in this issue of the ICTN contract, which, of course, report says has been awarded or had been awarded by the previous government of President Muhammadu Buhari. Tell us what's at stake here.
Well, first, I think what's at stake is the risk of maybe very damaging litigation. I mean, if a contract has been awarded by Federal Executive Council through in the previous government with, as it turned out, obligations that span for 15 years and with expected commitment of our awardees to bring in capital and make investment, just like we had with PNL, you have a possibility that the offended party could go to court, depending on the contract and the maybe arbitration clauses, and then finally get an award, as we've suffered a few months back. And it could be punished with very excessive and even aggravated damages. Again, we saw with the Chinese in Ogun State that we suffered the indignity, and we are still going through the process of trying to void that judgment that came from New York court and enforced in Paris. So this exposes the country to possible risk. And again, the question then is, how do we come to this? First, it looks like clearly different agencies pushing different projects. Again, the idea of the Public Procurement Act was to achieve 3 key things. One is value for money, that procurement process helps to give us price competitiveness. So we get to have technical qualification, which means that those who win contracts in Nigeria have the capability, technical capacity to execute those contracts. So we'll have little instances of project failure arising from projects awarded to persons who don't have the competence. So you have that technical assessment. And then financial bid. It means that at every time we are awarding contracts that are at the least possible cost, least technically responsive bid, meaning this is a cost that those who have the capacity, this is the best price we get. So if you go to that rigor, it gives you clarity, you get the advantage of cost efficiency, but also the idea was also to have, we will have contracts clarity as to what contracts have been awarded. And the fact that most of these big contracts are awarded at the Federal Executive Council mean that there should be a clear record of government as to what contract has been awarded and what the scope of that contract. So there should be no reason to have the same scope of work being awarded to a different contractor. So the notion is not being defeated. The objective of the procurement policy, the reform, is to avoid this situation where perhaps different agencies award contracts and create multiple liabilities for government. But here we are. So the question then is it that the government took a principled position to negate that contract? And did they go through any possible clause in the contract that allows them to pull away from the contract? Or does it mean that maybe new actors come on the scene and didn't like the other contract, or because they're not the ones that push the contract for whatever pecuniary or other benefits, and then they truncate that contract, disregard it, and muscle their way to get a new contract and pretend that perhaps the legal obligations arising from the previous contract would somehow be mooted because they are in power. That would be a tragic error because it doesn't work that way. I mean, for now, the aggrieved parties may pretend and wait for auspicious time to spring a surprise when maybe through foreign jurisdiction decisions or arbitral award, they now get government to suffer for that error. So for me, I'm more concerned about how government works, and it illustrates again the lack of coherence, the lack of comprehensiveness. If you look at the two contracts, the previous one was a contract by a consortium that allowed them to invest their own money. Ostensibly, government would not spend any money, but these guys would solve a problem and take a reward. We don't know the details of the sharing formula and what revenue could flow from their intervention. This second one, government is going to pay about $2.something billion for a service that will be provided for it. And the service is important because tracking of cargo is critical. I mean, it's the oil theft, the proliferation of firearms and presence of dangerous materials. On airport, the government has raised issue, closed it down at some point because of the fact that it's become a gateway to bring in illicit, unlawful materials, especially arms and ammunition. So it's an important service to be rendered. But the question is, how do you go about it? Who has the ownership of this project? Is it the blue marine economy? Is it the Ministry of Petroleum? Do you have multiple of this scoped out work that can be contracted out at different points? Do you want to have a centralized tracking system, in which case we have one contract that covers everything? So that really speaks to incoherence, speaks to maybe lack of due diligence and awareness of previous. I don't want to assume this is basically mischievous or somebody wanted to just throw away the contract. The best case could be they didn't quite know, or they were not diligent enough to know. Yeah.
Dr. Amadi, but I'm wondering, if you can simply term this a lack of due diligence or incoherence, or should we also suspect a bit of corruption at play? Because I'm wondering what this duplication, what impact it will have on us economically as a nation, and of course our ability to attract foreign investors.
I think you could say straight away that it's corruption. Again, you see, the idea of the economy we run has been described as a contract-based economy. And what that means is that when people come to government, their eyes are focused on contracts. They award this, award that. If you audit these contracts, both of these contracts, you probably will see layers of unnecessary overpricing. You even see that maybe over these years, we could have developed in-house capability to deal with all these issues. I mean, the government never does something internally. Everything is outsourced to contractors. And so we're in a contract economy, and the incentive structure of that economy would be that everybody who comes to power is looking at what contract to award. And oftentimes, that's the point. Deliberately, they disregard previous contracts. They resign them and look for frivolous excuses why not to go ahead. And we've seen that we've been punished again. Apart from the possibility of a diamond cut award, we also loss of faith. I mean, if you look at the oil and gas sector, or even particularly, we've not seen any serious investment in a long while. We've seen, if you look at the investment flow in Africa, see that Angola and even Ghana is upcoming. The percentage share of investment, Nigeria doesn't get much. We lose to these other new and old contenders because our business environment is very bad. Apart from inefficiency, crisis, political risk, you now have real financial risk, contractual risk, that even contracts that are entered in through due process. I mean, once something is awarded by FEC, that should mean that it has gone through all due processes. There should be no reason why it could be thrown away like that. Again, even if there are terms that the new government feels does not align with its major policy trust, then they will call for renegotiations. They will, in good faith, try to suggest that maybe some of the service component of the contract are no longer necessary, or maybe they would like to introduce other components that more or less align with their trust, not to disregard it. Again, for a government also that says that it's continuing from where President Buhari ended, and a government that is the same political party, it's now hard put to explain how you can jettison that contract legitimately approved by President Buhari and start a different contract. Is not explainable. That's no reason why that should happen. Like I said, if there are aspects that need to be renegotiated because of changed circumstances or because of new policy trust, then they could get back the parties to the table and in good faith explain and negotiate back those contracts. So this is unexplainable, except that's why I said for good, maybe I can assume that this will be gross negligence and unusual lack of awareness of government records and commitment. That's not expected of any government.
Thank you, Dr. Amadi. Yeah. I think it's quite instructive that you pointed out how important this particular project is. And looking at the fact that the past government did not activate it, the Minister of Marine and Blue Economy, under whose purview this contract was supposed to be activated, has left it. One would wonder why it was not activated, and also having to, award it to another company. And also looking at the fact that President Tinubu came into office promising to cut down the cost of governance. What does this say about this administration?
First, I've been very clear that the administrative capability of the government is weak and needs upgrade, which that translates to simply that, look, do you have ministers, do you have public officials, elected, appointed officials who are very diligent and competent to understand, understudy, and focus on the ministry? I think from all these multiple crises and from all these failures and slippages, it's clear to anybody that the quality of the administrative backstopping of government policy is weak, very deficient. And so whether it's in terms of competence of people or attention or even incentive to pay attention, that's a matter for discussion. The second issue is that it also speaks to maybe the ethical bearing of the government itself. Because look, like you already pointed out, there's basically no reason why this should happen, apart from perhaps some either interagency conflicts or some incentive to award contracts. Again, the other issue that this tells me is that at the level of the Federal Executive and the Due Process Office, again, the BPE has oversight in terms of whether to grant a no objection. The BPE rejected a no objection for a particular scope of work and granted for a second one. Now, the BPE should have known, because these previous contract, new contracts, the BPE has custodial, powers over them and oversight in terms of recommending approved or no objection, which means with that recommendation, the fair can go ahead. So the BPE probably should have spotted that, look, this same contract or similar contract has been awarded in the past. What I think is that also it comes to this idea of MOUs. I mean, oftentimes, because contract systems are frivolous, some people come in and tell you, look, well, they can do this service, don't pay us, we're going to deliver. And because we didn't put in money, we sign off. And then these people make investment. So we don't understand that even if government does not spend money on a commitment, the fact that government has signed up to a commitment has created legitimate expectation and detrimental reliance, which in law means that those people, that's what happened in the case of both the Chinese and the one that was suffered 2 years ago. Simple. You make a commitment, people make investments, and those investments themselves triggers expectation. So if you pull back, even if there were no government spend, you are liable. So it speaks to maybe lack of understanding that the process of government, whether it's MOU, whether it's a contract awarded with government making commitment financial or no commitment financial, these are legally binding, and therefore you can't override those contracts through other executive action. you have to perform them or validly through judicial process or renegotiation, get those contracts, redefined. So I think it speaks, like I said, the key point here is a question around competence, coherence. I use the word all the time because what that means is that, look, somebody should somewhere be going through all these things and, some kind of institutional memory to say, look, this has come up before. This has been awarded. We can't award it. And the Ministry of Marine Economy that has now ownership of the first contract should have activated them. Now, the lack of activating these contracts suggests that at some point, we don't even have the capability to begin to execute. We sign off these MOUs or contracts maybe in deference to their promoters who may be persons of political importance. And we sign off, we make those commitments, maybe funds are mobilized, but we really don't have, we're not in a state of readiness to begin to get those contracts implemented. Otherwise, once you sign off these contracts that are critical for critical services, you would expect activation and implementation to follow immediately. So the delay could also suggest that really, by the time we award these contracts, we're not even ready to begin to implement or begin to allow counterparties to implement those projects. We basically sign off due to pressure, due to other inducement, or because this is a big contract and people are going to get, kind of benefit from it. That speaks also to both corruption, both to the quality of administrative state in Nigeria and the capability to manage contracts. We see contract failures arising. Contract failure, one aspect, contract avoidance, and multiple, damages against government arising from these inefficiencies.
Dr. Sam Amadi, very well said. But I'm wondering, what role should our anti-corruption agencies and perhaps the civil society be playing in helping us to combat this incompetence, gross negligence, and incoherence that you have pointed out?
I think I've suggested in the past that the NBA have suggested the need for what I call legal practitioners, public sector law that criminalizes and punishes legal officers in the public sector who, by gross negligence or outward falsehood, help this contract, false contract, detrimental contract. I mean, we've had instances where people, chief executive always, send a memo to the legal advisors and say, advise me, and the advisor say, this is proper, go ahead. So we should now be penalizing gross misconduct in the aspect of professional legal advisory services. That's very important. People should have a skin in the game. We now have an epidemic of crazy contracts. I mean, if you look at some of the contracts the previous government walked back from, some of them are phony contracts, some of them are fraudulent. And so they now say, I just can't, both at the state level, at the federal level, you see, government comes in and see that a particular contract is actually, apart from, the figures being, outrageously, disproportionate to the work to be done. But you see that maybe there's just nothing to be done, and government has committed itself to pay money. Those who are behind it, especially the lawyers who advise due process, that give the due process advisory, should have a process for penalizing them. So when people have skin in the game, they would be careful in the advisory. So I think we need to look back at how do we hold people accountable for not just inefficiency or incompetence, which could be general, but for some egregious, gross misconduct bordering on intentional fraud or misadvising government. That's number one. And I think number two, the fact that the EFCC is more focused on, Yahoo, and all those, Yahoo, internet fraud, speaks to the background in which they were set up or looking at.
Dr. Amadi, we'll have to end the conversation here. But we should also see
this as important.
Thank you so much. That's a very fine place to end the conversation. Dr. Sam Amadi, Arise News analyst.